Hi there, I'm Eleanor. I discovered my parents secretly transferred my entire inheritance to my sister because she was more deserving. Then my offshore account statement arrived during our family dinner. No warning, no discussion, just betrayal. But that was only the beginning. They tried to contest my grandmother's separate bequest, pressured relatives to cut me from their wills, even told family friends I was financially irresponsible while I was funding their retirement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When I finally revealed the truth, they called me ungrateful. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated campaign they'd been orchestrating for years. What would you do if the people who raised you decided you were unworthy of your birthright? Would you accept their judgment? Or would you reveal just how wrong they were? Let's talk about it. The dinner invitation seemed innocent enough. A text from my mother on a Wednesday afternoon. Family dinner this Sunday at 6. Your father's making. His famous paella. Lauren's bringing that architect she's been seeing. Don't be late. Typical mom, more command than request. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and returned to reviewing client portfolios at my investment firm's Boston office. I had no reason to suspect anything unusual. Our monthly family dinners had been a tradition since I moved back from London 3 years ago, sometimes tense, occasionally pleasant, but always predictable. My parents' brownstone in Beacon Hill would be immaculate as always. My father would drink exactly 2 glasses of Rioja, and my sister Lauren would dominate the conversation with stories about her interior design clients or her latest relationship. I would ask polite questions, deflect inquiries about my own life, and be home by 9:30. That Sunday was unseasonably warm for April in Boston, the kind of spring evening that makes the city feel generous and full of possibility. Cherry blossoms lined Commonwealth Avenue, their pale pink petals drifting onto the sidewalks. I remember noticing how the late afternoon light gave everything a golden glow as I walked the familiar route to my parents' home, a bottle of Portuguese wine tucked under my arm. My mother answered the door in pearls and a cashmere sweater, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. "You're early," she said, accepting my kiss on the cheek with the stiff posture that had become her signature. Behind her, I could hear my father in the kitchen, the familiar clatter of his paella pan and the smell of saffron and seafood filling the house. Lauren arrived 20 minutes later, windswept and laughing, a tall man in a tailored blazer following her through the door. "Everyone, this is Marcus," she announced, as if presenting a prize. My parents descended on him immediately, my father offering wine, my mother asking practiced questions about his work, his family, his intentions. Lauren caught my eye across the room and smiled, that familiar smile that always seemed half apology, half triumph. Dinner began precisely at 6. My father's paella was beautiful as always, golden rice studded with mussels, shrimp, and chorizo. The conversation flowed predictably. Marcus talked about his architectural firm's latest project, renovating a historic building in Back Bay. My mother updated us on her garden club politics. My father complained about property taxes. I offered the appropriate responses at the appropriate moments, a skill I'd perfected over 34 years. Then, as my father was serving seconds, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. Normally I would have ignored it, but the notification caught my eye. Quarterly statement, Grand Cayman National Bank. I froze, my wine glass halfway to my lips. That account was my most closely guarded secret, known only to my grandmother and me. She had established it 10 years ago, funding it with what she called the legacy that matters. Investments she'd made independently throughout her life, separate from the family fortune my grandfather had built. "Your inheritance should be yours alone, Eleanor," she'd told me, "not controlled by your parents' opinions or your sister's needs." I must have visibly reacted because Lauren paused mid-sentence. "Everything okay, Ellie?" 4 sets of eyes turned to me. I placed my phone face down on the table. Fine, work notification. The lie came easily, but my mind was racing. Why would the statement arrive now, during dinner? Quarterly notices were typically sent at the beginning of the month, not mid-April, and certainly not at 6:37 p.m. on a Sunday. The conversation resumed, but I was barely listening, acutely aware of my phone beside my plate. When my mother rose to clear the table before dessert, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, opening the notification with shaking hands. The statement showed the expected balance, a substantial sum that had grown steadily under my careful management. But there was something else, a note from the bank's trust department. As requested, we confirm no other parties have attempted access to this account. Per your grandmother Elizabeth Blackwell's instructions, please be advised that the secondary notification protocol has been activated. Secondary notification protocol. The words seemed to pulse on the screen. In the 10 years since my grandmother had established the account, I'd never seen that phrase. But I knew what it meant. Grandmother had explained it once. If anyone ever tries to interfere with what I've left you, the bank will alert you immediately, not just through regular channels, but through an emergency notification system. Someone had tried to access my account or get information about it. I returned to the dining room as my mother was serving crème brûlée and the delicate ramekins my father had brought back from Barcelona. My parents exchanged a glance as I took my seat. "Eleanor," my father began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood when delivering pronouncements. "Your mother and I wanted to talk to you about something important." I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "Yes? We've been doing some estate planning," he continued, tapping his spoon precisely on the caramelized sugar of his dessert. "Making some necessary adjustments for the future." My mother interjected, her voice gentle but firm. "What your father is trying to say is that we've made some decisions about the inheritance structure." "We've decided," my father said, looking directly at me for the first time that evening, "that the bulk of our estate will go to Lauren." Lauren looked down at her plate, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "The house, the investments, the art collection," he continued, as if reading from an itemized list. "Lauren has demonstrated responsibility and commitment to family values. She's settled, building a future with marriage and children in mind. You, on the other hand," my mother added, her voice softening as if to cushion the blow, "have always been so independent. You have your career, your own life in finance. You don't need the family assets the way Lauren will." The words hung in the air between us. I felt a curious detachment, as if I were watching the scene from above. My parents' faces showed no guilt, no hesitation, only the certainty that they were doing the right thing. Lauren still wouldn't meet my eyes, and suddenly, with perfect clarity, I understood. The notification, the timing, the announcement, they weren't coincidental. Someone had tried to access my grandmother's account. Not just someone. Them. "When did you make this decision?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "We've been considering it for some time," my father replied. "But we finalized everything last month." Last month. When my grandmother's estate had finally cleared probate. When they would have discovered that the fortune they expected, the separate inheritance from my grandmother they'd always assumed would be divided equally, wasn't coming to them or to Lauren. Because grandmother had left it all to me, protected in an offshore account they couldn't touch. I looked at my family gathered around the table, my father confident in his authority, my mother serene in her support of his decisions, Lauren uncomfortable but accepting the advantage offered. To her, and Marcus watching the drama unfold with barely concealed interest. In that moment, I realized this dinner wasn't about paella or meeting Lauren's new boyfriend. It was a performance, a carefully orchestrated scene designed to put me in my place, to show me that if grandmother had chosen me, they were choosing Lauren. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What they didn't know was that I had just received confirmation of something far more disturbing. They had actively tried to take what wasn't theirs to redistribute. I didn't react the way they expected. There was no outburst, no tears, no demand for explanations. Instead, I took a small bite of my crème brûlée, savoring the contrast between the brittle caramelized sugar and the smooth custard beneath. "I see," I said finally, meeting my father's gaze. "Thank you for telling me." My mother's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose slightly, surprise flickering across her face before her composed expression returned. She had anticipated drama, not acceptance. "It's what makes the most sense for the family's future," my father added, his tone softening. Now that the difficult announcement was over, he reached for his wine glass, a signal that the topic was closed. Lauren finally looked up. "Ellie, It's fine," I interrupted, offering her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Dad's paella was excellent as always. The conversation awkwardly shifted to safer territory. Marcus's recent trip to Copenhagen for an architecture conference, the unseasonably warm weather, my mother's book club selection. I participated with practiced ease, asking appropriate questions, laughing at the right moments. Years in finance had taught me the power of a poker face, the strategic advantage of letting others believe they've won. By the time I kissed my parents goodbye at their front door, everyone seemed relieved. The difficult conversation had occurred without incident. The family hierarchy remained intact. "Call your sister this week," my mother whispered as she hugged me. "She feels terrible." I nodded, knowing I wouldn't. The walk home through Beacon Hill's narrow streets gave me time to process what had happened, the cool evening air clearing my thoughts. I wasn't surprised by my parents' decision. Not really. It was merely the culmination of a pattern established long ago, the final confirmation of what I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. My childhood home had been beautiful but cold, a showcase rather than a sanctuary. My parents, Richard and Catherine Blackwell, were respected figures in Boston society. My father, a cardiac surgeon at Massachusetts General. My mother, the chairwoman of several prominent charitable boards. Our family projected an image of impeccable success, generational wealth tastefully managed, children being groomed to continue the legacy. From the beginning, the roles had been clearly defined. Lauren, 3 years younger, was the golden child, vivacious, socially adept, interested in the right things. She played tennis at the country club, joined the junior league, attended my father's alma mater, dated appropriate young men from appropriate families. She struggled academically but received endless tutoring and support, her C+ grades celebrated as hard-won victories. I was the difficult one, too serious, too independent, asking uncomfortable questions at uncomfortable moments. I preferred books to parties, ideas to social connections. When I received a full scholarship to Oxford instead of attending my father's university, it was treated as a mild betrayal rather than an achievement. When I chose finance over medicine or law, my father's disappointment was palpable. "Numbers. Over people," he'd said, as if my career choice were a character flaw. The pattern continued into adulthood. Lauren's business ventures received family investment. Mine did not. Her relationships were the subject of interested family discussion. Mine were barely acknowledged. When she moved into a family-owned apartment in Back Bay rent-free, it was considered natural support. When I asked for a loan to start my investment advisory firm after returning from London, I was told it would be imprudent to mix family and business. Looking back, I could map the careful construction of the narrative. Eleanor is capable, independent, doesn't need help. Lauren requires support, deserves protection, needs the family safety net. It was a story told so consistently that even I had partly believed it, accepting smaller holiday gifts, less attention at family gatherings, fewer calls and invitations. The only person who had seen through it was my grandmother, Elizabeth Blackwell. A formidable woman who had quietly built her own fortune while my grandfather received all the credit. She had recognized something in me that my parents either couldn't see or chose to ignore. "You remind me of myself," she'd told me on my 24th birthday, the day she first mentioned the offshore account. "Too smart to accept the limitations they've set for you, too stubborn to play the role they've written." For the next 10 years, until her death 6 months ago at 92, she had been my closest confidant and most steadfast supporter. We spoke weekly, discussed investments, shared books that challenged conventional thinking. When I worked in London, she visited twice a year, preferring my small Notting Hill flat to my parents' Beacon Hill brownstone when she came to Europe. My grandmother's death had left a hollowness that even my carefully constructed independent life couldn't fill. The reading of her will had been tense, my parents clearly expecting to receive the bulk of her personal estate, looking increasingly confused as bequest after bequest went to charitable foundations, educational institutions, and various long-term employees. Lauren had received her art collection, my father her medical rare book library, my mother her jewelry. I had been left her personal diaries and correspondence, a bequest that my mother had dismissed as sentimental trinkets. What my family didn't know was that those diaries contained detailed records of my grandmother's separate investments, the ones that had funded the offshore account that was now mine alone. The notification during dinner confirmed what I had suspected since the reading of the will. My parents had been searching for my grandmother's hidden assets, convinced there must be more to her estate than what had been officially documented. Finding nothing in her U.S. accounts, they had somehow tracked down information about the Cayman account, perhaps through old correspondence, perhaps through her former attorney. They had attempted to access it, triggering the security protocol she had established. And when that failed, they had made their retaliatory move, cutting me out of their own estate entirely. As I reached my townhouse on a quiet side street near the public garden, I felt a strange sense of calm. The betrayal stung, but it also clarified. For years, I had been trying to earn a place in a family system that had already determined my value. I had been playing a game whose rules were designed to ensure I could never win. Inside, I hung my coat in the entryway of my meticulously renovated 1890s townhouse, a property I had purchased 2 years ago without family help or knowledge, financed through my own success and careful investments. My home reflected me in a way my childhood house never had. Clean lines, thoughtfully chosen art, walls of books, spaces designed for solitude and contemplation rather than impression and entertainment. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and sat in my study, opening my laptop to access the complete offshore account records. The balance was substantial, more than I had realized, as my grandmother had continued adding to it until shortly before her death. Enough to ensure my complete financial independence for life, if managed properly. More than enough to render my parents' decision about their own estate practically irrelevant from a financial perspective. But this wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about worth, about who deserved what. About the stories families tell themselves to justify treating their children differently. I opened a drawer and took out the leather-bound journals my grandmother had left me, dozens of them, documenting not just her financial decisions, but her observations about the family dynamics over decades. I had been reading them slowly since her death, discovering a woman even more perceptive and strategic than I had realized. Turning to an entry from 20 years ago, I read, "Richard and Catherine have always seen what they want to see in their daughters. They call it understanding their different needs, but it's simpler than that. They see themselves in Lauren, their social ambitions, their desire for approval. In Eleanor, they see me, my questions, my independence, and it unsettles them. They will never stop trying to correct what they perceive as a problem. As I closed the journal, my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Can we talk tomorrow? Just us?" I placed the phone face down without replying. Tomorrow would be soon enough to decide how or whether to respond. Tonight was for understanding exactly what I was dealing with and planning my next move carefully. Because one thing was now abundantly clear. This wasn't a simple estate decision. It was the culmination of a lifelong pattern, and addressing it would require more than an emotional reaction. It would require strategy. I didn't respond to Lauren's text that night or the next morning. Instead, I went to work as usual, arriving at the offices of Hawthorne Capital Partners by 7:30 a.m. The familiar rhythm of market openings, client calls, and portfolio reviews provided a welcome distraction from family drama. My corner office overlooked the Boston Harbor, the morning light glinting off the water as fishing boats and ferries crisscrossed the bay. I had built something here, a respected advisory practice specializing in sustainable investments and generational wealth. Planning. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Your 9:30 is here," my assistant May announced, poking her head into my office. "The Richardsons want to discuss their children's trust structures." I nodded, closing the document I'd been reviewing. "Send them in." For the next hour, I guided the Richardsons through options for their family wealth transfer, balancing tax efficiency with their desire to treat their 3 children equitably while accounting for their different life paths. They were thoughtful, concerned with fairness above all else. By the time they left, I felt a hollow ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my own financial situation. At noon, my phone buzzed again, Lauren calling this time. I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, an email arrived from her. "Ellie, please don't shut me out. I didn't know about Mom and Dad's decision until recently. I want to talk about this. It doesn't feel right. Call me when you can. L." I stared at her message, uncertain whether to believe her. Lauren had been my parents' echo for so long that separating her true feelings from their influence seemed impossible. Still, a small part of me wanted to believe she recognized the injustice. Just as I was considering a response, my desk phone rang. The secure line that only a handful of people had access to. "Ms. Blackwell, this is Raymond Powell from Grand Cayman National Bank Trust Division." I straightened in my chair. "Yes, Mr. Powell. Thank you for calling. I'm following up regarding the attempted access to your grandmother's established trust. We've completed our security review and wanted to share some concerning information." My pulse quickened. "Go ahead." The attempt wasn't digital, as we initially suspected. Someone physically presented themselves at our Georgetown branch 3 weeks ago, claiming to be executing the final wishes of Elizabeth Blackwell. They had documentation, some authentic, some questionable. "Who was it?" I asked, though I already suspected. "A man identifying himself as Richard Blackwell, accompanied by legal representation. He presented a document purporting to be an amendment to your grandmother's trust, naming him as a co-trustee with authority to access and manage the accounts. My father." The betrayal crystallized, sharp-edged and undeniable. "The document?" I managed to ask. "Our forensic team has confirmed it was created after your grandmother's death. The signature shows clear signs of being copied from another source." My hand tightened around the receiver. "You're saying they attempted to use fraudulent documents to access the account?" "I'm afraid so, Ms. Blackwell. We've preserved all evidence, as per our security protocols. Given the nature of this attempt, we recommend you consult with legal counsel regarding next steps." After thanking him and ending the call, I sat motionless, staring at the harbor. It wasn't just that my parents had tried to access my grandmother's bequest. They had apparently attempted to forge documents to do so. Then, when that failed, they had retaliated by cutting me from their own estate. I opened my desk drawer and removed a small leather notebook, my own, not my grandmother's. In it, I had been documenting every conversation, decision, and financial interaction with my family for the past 3 years. A habit formed from years of working with high net worth families and witnessing how money could distort relationships, creating selective memories and convenient narratives. Now I added this new information with a steady hand, noting dates, names, and exact phrasing. When I finished, I closed the notebook and made 2 calls, first to my attorney, requesting an urgent meeting, and second to my banker at First Boston Trust. "Nathan, I need to make a significant transfer from my personal accounts," I explained. "Of course, Ms. Blackwell." "Amount?" I named a figure that represented nearly half my liquid assets outside the offshore account. "And the recipient?" "Blackwell. Family Foundation." The Blackwell Family Foundation was my parents' charitable vehicle, established decades ago to support medical research and educational initiatives. My father served as chairman, my mother as director of grant-making. Lauren sat on the board. I had declined a position years ago, citing conflicts with my financial practice. "May I ask the purpose of this transfer?" Nathan inquired, his tone professional but curious. "Family obligation," I replied. "Please mark it as anonymous." After ending the call, I sent a brief email to Lauren. "Meeting with clients until late. Tonight. Let's have lunch tomorrow. Fleming's at 1 Mai?" Her response came immediately. "I'll be there." "Thank you, Ellie." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of client meetings and investment reviews. I left the office at 6 Giao, not heading home but to the small cafe near the public garden where I'd arranged to meet Abigail Chen, my attorney. Abigail was already waiting, a cup of green tea and a stack of folders on the table before her. In her mid-50s, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses, she had been my legal advisor since I returned from London. More importantly, she had never worked with my parents or their extensive network of associates. "This sounds serious," she said, after I slid into the seat across from her. "It is." I outlined everything: the offshore account, my grandmother's security measures, the bank's confirmation of attempted fraud, my parents' announcement about their estate. Abigail listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "What do you want to accomplish here, Eleanor?" she asked when I finished. "Are you looking to challenge your parents' estate decision, pursue action regarding the attempted fraud, or simply protect yourself going forward?" I considered her question carefully. "I want the truth documented and protected. I'm not interested in fighting them for their money. That's their choice. But I won't allow them to rewrite history or compromise what my grandmother intended for me." Abigail nodded. "Then we start with preservation of evidence and formal documentation. I'll contact Grand Cayman National about obtaining certified records of the attempted access. We should also have your grandmother's diaries reviewed by a forensic accountant to correlate her records with the offshore accounts." "And the anonymous donation?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "An interesting move. Care to explain your strategy?" "It's not strategy," I replied. "It's a test." Fleming's was buzzing with the lunch crowd when I arrived the next day. Boston Financial District regulars in tailored suits occupying leather booths, the air filled with the low hum of business conversations and the clink of silverware against china. I deliberately chose a table near the back, partially obscured by a decorative column but with a clear view of the entrance. Lauren arrived precisely at 1, looking polished in a pale blue dress and camel coat. Her expression was a mixture of relief and apprehension as she scanned the restaurant, her shoulders visibly relaxing when she spotted me. I didn't stand to greet her, merely nodded as she approached. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Of course," I replied, my tone neutral. I wouldn't make this easy for her. A server appeared immediately with water and menus. Lauren ordered a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. I asked for sparkling water with lime. Small talk filled the space until our drinks arrived. Comments about the unseasonable warmth continuing, a new exhibition at the MFA, the traffic on Starro Drive. Finally, when the server departed after taking our lunch orders, Lauren leaned forward. "About Sunday night," she began, her fingers nervously tracing the stem of her wine glass. "I want you to know I had no idea what Mom and Dad were planning until a few weeks ago. They presented it as already decided." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Lauren had always been an open book to me, her tells obvious from childhood. The slight flush creeping up her neck suggested she was telling at least a partial truth. "Did you object?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. I told them it seemed unfair. But you accepted it." Lauren's gaze dropped to her lap. "They had their reasons, Ellie. Dad said that I'm independent and don't need it the way you do," I finished for her. "Yes, I was there." "It sounds terrible when you put it like that," she murmured. "How should it sound, Lauren? That I'm being punished for supporting myself? For building a career instead of relying on family money?" She looked up sharply. "It's not a punishment. They just think—" "I know what they think," I interrupted, keeping my voice low despite the emotions swirling beneath the surface. "They've made it clear my entire life. What I'm curious about is what you think." Lauren took a long sip of her wine, buying time. "I think they've always seen us differently. You were always the smart one, the capable one. I was the one who needed protecting," I supplied. She nodded reluctantly. "But Ellie, I never asked them to cut you out. You have to believe that. Our food arrived. A seasonal salad for Lauren, seared scallops for me." We paused as the server arranged our plates and inquired if we needed anything else. When he departed, I changed tack. "Have you heard anything about grandmother's estate recently? Any discussions about unexpected assets or accounts?" Lauren's fork paused halfway to her mouth, a momentary hesitation that told me everything. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." Dad seemed particularly interested in her financial arrangements after the will reading. "Well," Lauren said carefully, "he mentioned being surprised that her estate wasn't larger. He thought there might be other accounts or investments not included in the probate process." I nodded, taking a bite of scallop. "And did he pursue that?" Lauren's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "He consulted some people. I don't know the details." "I see." I kept my expression neutral, betraying nothing of what I knew. "And the family foundation? Any new major donations lately?" She brightened, seemingly relieved by the change of subject. "Actually, yes. Dad mentioned at breakfast yesterday that they received an anonymous donation. Quite substantial. They're thinking of establishing a new scholarship program with it." "How lovely," I said, allowing a small smile. "Anonymous donor?" "Completely anonymous. Dad's quite intrigued. He's been calling his friends trying to figure out who it might be." She laughed lightly. "You know how he hates not knowing things." The test was proceeding exactly as I'd anticipated. The anonymous donation, my donation, had been received, but not connected to me. More importantly, my parents hadn't felt compelled to acknowledge it to the one family member not involved. In the foundation. "Speaking of Dad," Lauren continued, "he asked about you this morning, wanted to know if we'd spoken." "And what did you tell him?" "That we were having lunch today. He seemed relieved, I think. He was worried you might be upset." I nearly laughed at the understatement. "Upset that my parents attempted to access my offshore account with forged documents, then cut me from their will when they failed? Why would that upset me?" Lauren's face went pale, her fork clattering against her plate. "What are you talking about? What offshore account?" I watched her reaction carefully, the widened eyes, the genuine shock. Perhaps she wasn't completely in their confidence after all. "Grandmother left me a significant inheritance, Lauren, separately from her visible estate, in an offshore account that Dad tried to access 3 weeks ago using falsified documents." That's not possible," she whispered. "Dad wouldn't—" "The bank has confirmed it," I said firmly. "They have the documentation, the security footage, everything." Lauren looked physically ill now, her salad forgotten. Why would he do that? Why indeed, I replied. Perhaps for the same reason they decided I was undeserving of any family inheritance. Ellie, I swear I didn't know about any of this. Her voice cracked slightly. This isn't right. For a moment, I glimpsed the sister I'd grown up with, the one who, despite our parents' favoritism, had sometimes stood up for me in small ways, before social positioning and parental approval became her primary concerns. What will you do? She asked quietly. I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten lunch. I haven't decided yet. But Lauren, I want to be very clear about something. This isn't about the money. I don't need their inheritance. What I won't tolerate is the deception, the manipulation, the attempt to control what isn't theirs to control. She nodded slowly, her expression troubled. I understand. And I'm sorry. For what, specifically? I asked, needing to hear her articulate it. For not questioning them more. For accepting their decisions without considering how it affected you. For being complicit, I guess. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, but it was something. A crack in the unified family front they had presented at Sunday's dinner. I signaled for the check, ready to end this conversation while it remained civil. Think carefully about whose side you're on, Lauren, I said as I signed the receipt. Because when the truth comes out, and it will, everyone will have to answer for their choices. I left her sitting there, staring into her wine glass. As I walked back toward my office through the financial district, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only a cold certainty that what had begun as a family dinner was evolving into something far more consequential. The restraint I'd shown, both with my parents and now with Lauren, wasn't forgiveness or weakness. It was strategy. Because in my world of high-stakes financial management, I'd learned that the most devastating moves were rarely made in anger. They were calculated, timed, and executed with precision. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual, before even the most ambitious analysts. The soft glow of dawn painted the harbor with gentle pinks and oranges as I settled at my desk with a cup of strong black coffee. These quiet moments before the markets opened were typically reserved for reviewing international positions and preparing for the day ahead. Today, they would serve a different purpose. I opened my laptop and logged into my secure email to find a message from Abigail Chen, sent at 11:43 p.m. the previous night. Eleanor Grand Cayman National has agreed to provide the full documentation package regarding the attempted account access. Their legal team is preparing it now and will send it directly to my office via secure courier within 48 hours. They've also confirmed they're willing to provide formal statements if necessary. I've engaged Patricia Winters from Forensic Financial Services to review your grandmother's diaries and correlate them with the offshore holdings. She's the best in the business and, importantly, has no connections to Boston's financial establishment that might create conflicts. One more thing. I've done some preliminary research on the Blackwell Family Foundation. Their latest filing shows some interesting patterns in grant distribution and board compensation that might be relevant to our discussions. We should review these when we meet next. Call me when you've read this. Abigail. I made a note to call her later that morning, then turned to the other task I'd set for myself. Opening my bottom desk drawer, I removed a small silver key that I normally kept separate from my work life, the key to my grandmother's safe deposit box at First Boston Trust. The box contained items too sensitive or valuable for her home, family documents, certain jewelry pieces, and most importantly for my current situation, her personal correspondence with her own attorney, Walter Hammond, who had preceded her in death by nearly 5 years. I hadn't accessed the box since shortly after her funeral, when I'd retrieved her great-grandmother's sapphire earrings for temporary safekeeping while her estate was being processed. There hadn't been time then to review the documents thoroughly. Now, that oversight seemed potentially significant. I placed the key in my purse and continued with my morning routine, reviewing client portfolios and preparing for a 10 a.m. investment committee meeting. At 9:15, I called Abigail. "I received your email," I said when she answered. "Thank you for moving so quickly." "Time matters in these situations," she replied, "especially when we're dealing with potential document fraud. Have you had any contact with your family since your lunch with Lauren?" "No. Nothing." "Good. Maintain that distance for now. What's your plan for today?" I told her about the safe deposit box and my intention to visit the bank during lunch. "Excellent," she approved. "Documentary evidence from before your grandmother's death could be particularly valuable. Let me know what you find." The morning proceeded with deceptive normalcy. Client calls, market analyses, the usual rhythm of wealth management. If my colleagues noticed anything unusual in my demeanor, they didn't mention it. Years of navigating volatile markets had given me a professional poker face that served me equally well in personal crises. At 12:30, I left for First Boston Trust, a venerable institution housed in a granite building downtown. The marble-floored lobby echoed with hushed conversations and the subtle sounds of wealth in motion. I was escorted to the vault area by Gregory, the private client manager who had worked with my family for decades. "It's been some time since we've seen you, Ms. Blackwell," he commented as we walked down the hushed corridor to the vault. "I trust everything is well with your family?" "As well as can be expected," I replied noncommittally. "Still adjusting after grandmother's passing?" He nodded sympathetically. "Mrs. Blackwell was a remarkable woman, one of our most distinguished clients for over 60 years. The vault attendant verified my identification and signature, then led me to a private viewing room after retrieving the box. When the door closed behind me, I sat at the small table and opened the brushed steel container. Inside were several neatly organized folders, each labeled in my grandmother's precise handwriting: family documents, personal correspondence, legal matters, and financial records. I started with legal matters, finding exactly what I had hoped for: a comprehensive file of her communications with Walter Hammond regarding the establishment of the Offshore Trust. The correspondence detailed her explicit intentions. The funds were meant for me alone, established separately from the family estate to ensure they couldn't be redirected by my parents. There were notes from meetings where she had expressed concerns about their treatment of me compared to Lauren, their attempts to control my career choices, their dismissal of my accomplishments. Most crucially, there was a letter from Hammond, dated 6 years ago, confirming that Richard and Catherine Blackwell had been explicitly informed that Elizabeth was establishing a separate trust for me that would not be part of her visible estate. My parents had known all along. Their surprise at the reading of the will had been theater, their subsequent search for hidden assets, a calculated attempt to circumvent her wishes. I photographed each document carefully with my phone, ensuring the dates and signatures were clearly visible. Then I moved to the financial records folder, finding quarterly statements from the Cayman account dating back 10 years, along with handwritten notes tracking its growth and performance. At the bottom of the box, underneath all the folders, was an envelope I hadn't noticed during my previous visit. It was addressed simply to Eleanor, in my grandmother's handwriting, with a notation: "To be opened only if necessary." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of her personal stationery, dated just 3 months before her death. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, something has occurred that has made you question the arrangements I've made for you, or perhaps the motives of our family in relation to them. I have always seen myself in you, not just your intelligence or your independence, but your fundamental decency. You have succeeded not by manipulating others or leveraging family connections, but through your own merit and hard work. This is why I've chosen to protect a portion of my estate specifically for you. Your parents will never truly understand this choice. They operate within a framework of obligations and appearances that has always been foreign to your nature. They will likely attempt to reassert control when I am gone. It is their way. Remember this. What I have given you is not just financial security, but freedom from the expectations that have constrained so many women in our family, myself included, for too many years. Use it wisely, but do not allow anyone, family or otherwise, to diminish its significance or redirect its purpose. If difficulties arise, Walter Hammond's successor at the firm, Julian Pierce, has complete records of my intentions and the legal protections I've put in place. He has instructions to assist you should contestation occur. Stand firm, my dear. Your life is your own to shape. With complete confidence in you, grandmother. I read the letter twice, then carefully returned it to its envelope. The timing of this discovery felt almost orchestrated from beyond the grave. My grandmother providing exactly the emotional and practical reinforcement I needed at precisely the right moment. Before replacing everything in the box, I took one final action, removing a small flash drive that had been taped to the inside lid of the container, labeled simply, backup. I slipped it into my purse alongside the key. Returning to my office, I forwarded the photographs of the documents to Abigail with a brief explanation of their significance. Then I plugged the flash drive into my computer. It contained digital copies of all the physical documents in the safe deposit box, plus additional files, recordings of meetings between my grandmother and her attorneys, scanned copies of handwritten notes documenting conversations with my parents over the years, and a detailed timeline of the establishment and management of the offshore account. Elizabeth Blackwell had been methodical in her documentation, anticipating the very situation I now found myself in. She had left nothing to chance, nothing to interpretation. Her intentions were crystal clear, as were the steps she had taken to ensure they would be honored. By the end of the day, I had organized all the evidence into a comprehensive file structure, created secure backups, and compiled a preliminary timeline of events. The picture it painted was damning, not just of my parents' recent actions regarding the will and the offshore account, but of a decades-long pattern of manipulation and favoritism that had culminated in their current attempt to control my financial future. As I prepared to leave the office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source. Marcus, Lauren's architect boyfriend. Need to talk to you about something important. Not comfortable discussing it with Lauren yet. Coffee tomorrow morning? I stared at the message, weighing the possibilities. Was this a trap set by my parents? A genuine concern from someone who had witnessed something troubling? Or perhaps an attempt by Lauren to gather information through a proxy? After careful consideration, I replied, 7:30 a.m., Thinking Cup on Newberry. Come alone. Whatever his motives, Marcus had just volunteered to become another piece in this increasingly complex puzzle, one that I was now fully equipped to solve. The Thinking Cup was already crowded with early morning customers when I arrived. At 7:15, professionals grabbing espresso before work, students hunched over laptops, tourists planning their day on the Freedom Trail. I chose a table in the back corner with a clear view of both entrances, ordered a cortado, and waited. Marcus arrived precisely at 7:30, looking more subdued than he had at Sunday's dinner. The tailored confidence was replaced by a hesitant demeanor as he scanned the cafe. When he spotted me, he nodded once and made his way through the crowd. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sliding into the chair across from mine. "I admit I'm curious about what couldn't be discussed with Lauren," I replied, studying him carefully. He ordered a black coffee, then leaned forward. "I'm in an awkward position. Lauren and I have only been dating for a few months, but things have gotten serious quickly. Sunday was my first time meeting your parents. And after dinner, when you left, there was a conversation I don't think I was meant to hear." He looked uncomfortable, running a hand through his dark hair. "I went to use the bathroom upstairs. When I was coming back down, I overheard your parents and Lauren in the study. The door was partially open." I kept my expression neutral. What did you hear exactly? Your father was upset. He said something like, "She's not going to let this go. Eleanor was always too stubborn for her own good." Then your mother said, "Richard, lower your voice." We agreed this was the cleanest solution. If we can't access Elizabeth's accounts, we at least ensure our own assets are protected. My pulse quickened, but I maintained my composure. Go on. Lauren sounded distressed. She asked, "But what if Ellie finds out about the Cayman situation?" Your father dismissed. It said something about banking privacy laws making it impossible to prove anything. Marcus paused, his discomfort evident. Then he mentioned something about document amendments being untraceable. Did they notice you? He shook his head. I backed away before they saw me. Look, I don't know what's happening in your family, but it didn't sound right. Lauren was clearly troubled by the conversation, but when I asked her about it later, she changed the subject. I considered him thoughtfully. His account aligned perfectly with what I already knew, adding crucial confirmation that Lauren was at least partially aware of my parents' deception. But why was he telling me this? Why come to me instead of discussing this with Lauren? I asked directly. Marcus hesitated. I grew up in a family where money was weaponized. My parents divorced when I was 12, and the financial manipulation destroyed relationships that never recovered. I care about Lauren, but I need to know what I'm walking into here. His explanation rang true. There was a personal history behind his concern, not just curiosity or misplaced loyalty. Has Lauren mentioned anything about my grandmother's estate or about offshore accounts? Nothing specific, he replied. Just that there had been some complications with your grandmother's will and that your parents were handling it. I nodded slowly, making a decision. Marcus, what you overheard wasn't just a family disagreement. It was evidence of attempted financial fraud. His eyes widened, but he didn't seem entirely surprised. I gave him a concise overview of the situation. My grandmother's separate bequest, my parents' attempt to access it using falsified documents, their retaliatory decision to cut me from their will. That's serious, he said when I finished. Have you confronted them? Not yet. I'm still gathering evidence. He nodded thoughtfully. That's smart. Documentation matters in these situations. After a moment's hesitation, he added, If you need it, I'm willing to provide a statement about what I overheard. Why would you do that? You barely know me, and it could complicate your relationship with Lauren. Marcus looked down at his coffee. Like I said, I've seen this pattern before. Financial manipulation doesn't stop with one incident. It escalates. Whatever your parents are involved in, Lauren is being drawn into it. That concerns me. After he left, I remained at the table, finishing my cortado and processing this unexpected development. Marcus's account provided external confirmation of what I'd pieced together from bank records and my grandmother's documents. More importantly, it revealed that my parents were worried enough to discuss the situation in their home, worried about what I might discover. As I walked to my office through the crisp morning air, fragments of memories surfaced, incidents I'd dismissed or rationalized over the years that now formed a clear pattern. My college graduation, where my parents had arrived late and left early, explaining they needed to attend Lauren's end-of-year art exhibition at her private high school. I'd celebrated my summa cum laude honors with friends instead of family. My first major promotion at Harrington Financial in London, when I'd called home excited to share the news. My mother had answered, listened briefly, then interrupted to pass the phone to my father because Lauren just got in and we need to hear about her trip to Paris. The family vacation to Nantucket 3 summers ago, where I'd been assigned the converted attic room while Lauren enjoyed the oceanfront guest suite. You're hardly here anyway, my mother had explained. You're always working or running on the beach. The pattern extended to financial matters as well, my parents helping Lauren with the down payment on her Back Bay condo, while responding to my request for a business loan with concerns about enabling dependency. The joint investment account they'd established with Lauren when she turned 25, with no equivalent offered to me. The family art collection, which my father had always said would be divided appropriately between his daughters, with the most valuable pieces now hanging in Lauren's apartment. What had once seemed like isolated incidents, or at worst unconscious favoritism, now revealed themselves as a systematic pattern of unequal treatment. The current situation with my grandmother's bequest and my parents' will wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a lifetime of disparate treatment. Reaching my office, I found an overnight package from Abigail Chen waiting on my desk. Inside was a preliminary report from the forensic accountant, Patricia Winters, along with a note from Abigail. Eleanor, Patricia's initial findings are concerning. The documents from your grandmother's safe deposit box provide clear evidence of your parents' prior knowledge of the offshore arrangements. Combined with the bank's confirmation of attempted fraudulent access, we now have sufficient grounds to proceed with formal legal action if you choose that route. I've also received confirmation from Julian Pierce at Hammond & Associates that he has additional records of meetings with your grandmother where she expressed specific concerns about your parents attempting to interfere with your inheritance. We should discuss next steps soon. This pattern of behavior likely extends beyond what we've documented so far. Abigail, I opened Patricia's report, scanning the executive summary. She had correlated my grandmother's financial records with the offshore account statements, confirming that every deposit matched entries in Elizabeth's personal ledgers. More significantly, she had identified a series of unusual withdrawals from my parents' personal accounts, coinciding with their trip to Grand Cayman 3 weeks ago. Withdrawals that aligned perfectly with the timeline of the attempted fraudulent access. The evidence was mounting, becoming irrefutable. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. It was about a deliberate attempt to undermine my grandmother's wishes, potentially committing fraud in the process, followed by retribution when that attempt failed. I reached for my phone to call. Abigail then paused as a new email notification appeared on my screen. The sender, Richard Blackwell. Subject, family dinner. This Sunday. The message was brief. Eleanor, your mother, and I would like you to join us for dinner this Sunday at 6 p.m. Lauren will be there. We have family matters to discuss that can't be postponed. Dad, no mention of our last disastrous dinner. No acknowledgement of the inheritance announcement. No hint of the attempted fraud or the ongoing investigation. Just a summons, as if nothing had happened. I stared at the message, a cold clarity settling over me. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't realize how much evidence I had gathered. They were proceeding with whatever plan they had set in motion, confident in their ability to control the narrative. For the first time since this began, I smiled, because now I understood exactly what I needed to do. I replied to my father's email with a single line, "I'll be there." Looking forward to our discussion. The days leading up to Sunday's dinner passed with strategic purpose. I met with Abigail twice, reviewing our documentation and discussing potential scenarios. The package from Grand Cayman National arrived, containing security footage, affidavits from bank personnel, and copies of the fraudulent documents my father had presented. Julian Pierce from Hammond & Associates provided additional sworn statements regarding my grandmother's explicit instructions and concerns. By Saturday evening, I had everything I needed, not just evidence of the attempted fraud, but a comprehensive record of the pattern that had led to it. I organized it all into a leather portfolio, adding a final document that Abigail had helped me prepare. That night, I slept surprisingly well. There's a certain calm that comes with absolute certainty, with knowing exactly where you stand and what must be done. Sunday arrived clear and cool, the first hints of autumn touching the trees along Commonwealth Avenue. I dressed with care, a charcoal gray dress, pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's, subtle makeup. Professional, composed, unmistakably serious. This wasn't a casual family dinner. It was a reckoning. I arrived at my parents' brownstone at precisely 5:55 p.m., the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. My mother answered the door, her practiced smile faltering slightly when she noticed the portfolio. "Working on a Sunday, Eleanor? You know your father prefers we leave business at the office." Her tone was gently chiding, as if I were still a teenager who needed reminding about family rules. "Some matters can't be compartmentalized, Mother," I replied, stepping past her into the foyer. My father was in the living room, martini in hand, discussing something with Lauren, who looked tense despite her efforts to appear relaxed. Marcus sat slightly apart, nodding politely at whatever my father was saying while his eyes tracked the room. He noticed me first, his expression shifting subtly in recognition. "Eleanor," my father said, turning as I entered. "Glad you could join us." His tone was neutral, neither warm nor cold, the voice he used for professional colleagues rather than family. "Dad," I acknowledged, setting my portfolio on the coffee table before accepting the glass of white wine my mother offered. "Lauren, Marcus." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Normally, my mother would fill it with questions about work or comments about acquaintances. Instead, she glanced at my father, who cleared his throat. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, he announced. "I thought we might use this time to continue our discussion from last week." "About the inheritance?" I stated rather than asked. "Yes." He straightened slightly, adopting the posture he used when delivering diagnoses to patients. "I know the news came as a surprise, but your mother and I have given this considerable thought. It's what makes the most sense for the family going forward." "Because Lauren needs it more than I do," I said, repeating his justification from our previous dinner. "Precisely. You've always been financially independent, Eleanor. Your career is thriving. Lauren's design business is still establishing itself, and she's considering starting a family with Marcus in the near future." He glanced at them, Marcus shifting uncomfortably under his gaze. I took a measured sip of wine. "And when did you make this decision exactly?" my mother interjected. "We've been discussing it for some time, dear. These decisions don't happen overnight." 3 weeks ago, perhaps?" I asked, my voice deliberately casual. My father's hand tightened slightly around his martini glass. A minor tell, but one I'd observed throughout my childhood whenever he felt challenged. "I don't see how the exact timing is relevant." "It's entirely relevant," I said, placing my wine glass on the table and reaching for the portfolio. "Just as the timing of your trip to Grand Cayman is relevant." The room went still. Lauren's eyes widened, darting between me and our parents. My mother's carefully maintained composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about," my father said, his voice measured but with an edge of tension. "We haven't been to Grand Cayman in years." I removed a document from the portfolio and placed it on the coffee table, a color printout of the security camera image from Grand Cayman National Bank, showing my father and an unidentified man in a suit standing at the teller counter. The timestamp was clearly visible. 3 weeks ago, Tuesday. "This says otherwise." My mother stood abruptly. "I should check on dinner." "Sit down, Catherine," I said quietly but firmly. "This concerns you too." To my mild surprise, she complied, perching on the edge of the sofa beside my father. His expression had hardened, the pleasant facade dropping away. "You've been investigating us?" he demanded, indignation rising in his voice. "No, Dad. I've been investigating an attempted fraud against my grandmother's estate. The fact that it leads back to you is your doing, not mine." Lauren leaned forward, confusion evident on her face. "What's going on? What fraud?" I addressed her directly. 3 weeks ago, our father traveled to Grand Cayman and attempted to access an offshore account established by grandmother for me. He presented falsified documents claiming to be a co-trustee with authority to manage the funds. That's absurd, my father interjected. This is obviously some kind of mistake. I placed another document on the table, the affidavit from the bank's security officer. The bank's investigation found no mistake. They've preserved all evidence, including the forged documents bearing what appears to be grandmother's signature, dated 3 months after her death. Lauren gasped softly. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim but unsurprised. My mother found her voice. Eleanor, whatever you think you've discovered has been taken completely out of context. Your father was simply making inquiries about your grandmother's estate as executor. He's not the executor, I interrupted. Julian Pierce at Hammond and Associates is, and the account in question was explicitly established outside the estate precisely to prevent this kind of interference. I withdrew my grandmother's letter from the portfolio and read it aloud, my voice steady despite the emotion swelling beneath the surface. When I finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My father's expression had shifted from indignation to calculation. This is all very dramatic, Eleanor, but ultimately it changes nothing. What your grandmother chose to do with her money is her business. What your mother and I choose to do with ours is our business. Ordinarily, I would agree, I replied, except when those choices are retaliatory and connected to attempted fraud. You can't prove that, he said dismissively. Actually, I can. I placed the forensic accountant's report on the growing pile of documents. The timing of your decision to cut me from your will perfectly aligns with your failed attempt to access grandmother's account. The withdrawals from your personal account for the Cayman trip, the conversation Marcus overheard after our last dinner, it all creates a clear pattern of intent. At the mention of the overheard conversation, Lauren turned to Marcus with a look of betrayal. He met her gaze steadily. I'm sorry, Lauren, but your parents were discussing fraudulent documents and banking secrecy laws. What was I supposed to do? My father stood abruptly. This is preposterous. You've constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory based on coincidences and misunderstandings. I won't sit here and be accused in my own home. Then perhaps you'd prefer to address these accusations in court, I suggested calmly. Abigail Chen is prepared to file first thing tomorrow morning. Fraud charges, potential RICO violations for cross-border financial crimes, the full spectrum. Unless, of course, we can reach an understanding tonight. Are you threatening us? My mother asked, her voice rising with genuine alarm. I'm offering a choice, I corrected. One with significantly better terms than you'd receive from a judge. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across my father's face. He was a proud man, accustomed to control, unused to being outmaneuvered. But he was also pragmatic, particularly when cornered. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice tight. Withdrew the final document from my portfolio. It's all outlined here. A formal acknowledgement of grandmother's bequest and your attempt to interfere with it. A rescinding of the recent changes to your will, returning to equal distribution between Lauren and me, and a dissolution of my connection to the Blackwell family foundation, effectively removing me from any financial entanglements with you going forward. You're asking us to admit to crimes we didn't commit, my father protested, though with less conviction than before. I'm asking you to acknowledge what we all know happened, I corrected. The document doesn't use the words fraud or forgery. It simply establishes a factual timeline and corrects the recent changes to your estate plan. My mother reached for the document, scanning it with increasing discomfort. This would humiliate us if it ever became public. It remains private unless you violate the terms, I assured her. I have no interest in family scandal. I just want this pattern to end, clearly and definitively. This is coercion, my father said, his voice hardening as he scanned the document my mother had passed to him. His fingers tightened on the edges of the paper, knuckles whitening. You're blackmailing us with fabricated accusations. I met his gaze steadily. Everything in that agreement is supported by evidence you've just seen. Bank records, security footage, sworn statements, forensic financial analysis. This isn't fabrication, it's documentation. And if we refuse to sign? Then I'll proceed with legal action tomorrow, I replied calmly. The evidence goes to the district attorney, the SEC, and FinCEN for the international banking violations. My father's jaw tightened as he looked from the document to me, searching for weakness or uncertainty. Finding none, he turned to Lauren. Are you hearing this? Your sister is threatening to destroy this family over money. Lauren looked stricken, caught between lifelong loyalty and the undeniable evidence before her. Dad, the bank photos and grandmother's letter, is it true? Did you try to access her account? Of course not in the way she's implying, he dismissed. I made inquiries as a family member concerned about potential assets being hidden from proper estate administration. That's all. With forged documents? I challenged. With a falsified trust amendment? Your mother prepared those papers based on what we believed were Elizabeth's intentions, he countered, a new narrative forming as he spoke. She always told us everything would be divided equally between her granddaughters. We were simply trying to honor her true wishes. My mother nodded quickly. Exactly. We thought there had been a mistake, or that someone had taken advantage of her in her final months. The seamless pivot to this new explanation, casting themselves as protectors rather than perpetrators, was so practiced it almost seemed rehearsed. In another context, with less concrete evidence, it might have been convincing. That doesn't explain the timing of changing your will immediately after the Cayman attempt failed, I pointed out. Or why you never mentioned this supposed concern. For grandmother's true wishes until now? The timing was coincidental, my father insisted. We'd been discussing estate changes for months, and we didn't mention the Cayman matter because it was sensitive. We didn't want to upset you if it turned out to be nothing. Marcus, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke. Dr. Blackwell, with respect, that doesn't align with what I overheard last Sunday. You specifically mentioned Eleanor not letting this go, and Mrs. Blackwell referred to your estate changes as a solution after being unable to access Elizabeth's accounts. My father's expression darkened. You're hardly a neutral party here, young man. Your relationship with Lauren gives you a vested interest in supporting whatever narrative benefits your future. Actually, sir, Marcus replied evenly, if I were motivated by self-interest, I'd be supporting your position. Lauren receives more under your current will than under Eleanor's proposed return to equal distribution. This logical point seemed to catch my father off guard. Before he could formulate a response, my mother rose suddenly. Dinner is certainly ready by now. Perhaps we should continue this discussion at the table. The food can wait, I said firmly. This needs to be resolved now. Or what? My father's tone turned biting. You'll have us arrested at dinner? Create a public scandal that would tarnish the Blackwell name for generations? Destroy the family foundation that supports dozens of medical research initiatives? Is that really what Elizabeth would have wanted? It was a calculated appeal, invoking my grandmother's legacy, the family reputation, the charitable work that had always been a source of pride. A sophisticated attempt to shift the moral high ground. Grandmother wanted me to be treated fairly, I responded. Something this family has struggled with for as long as I can remember. Oh, here we go, my father sighed dramatically. The perpetual victim narrative. We've given you every advantage, Eleanor. The best schools, connections, opportunities. The fact that you've chosen to hold yourself apart from this family is your decision, not ours. The conversation was spiraling away from the specific evidence into familiar, unresolvable family dynamics. I needed to refocus. Let's be very clear, I said, tapping the portfolio of evidence. This isn't about my feelings or family dynamics. It's about documented attempts to circumvent grandmother's legally established trust, followed by retaliatory financial actions when that attempt failed. You can sign the agreement and we move forward privately, or you can refuse and we proceed through official channels. My father stared at me for a long moment, calculation evident in his eyes. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A short, harsh sound devoid of humor. You know what, Eleanor? You've always been exactly like her. Stubborn, suspicious, keeping your own counsel. Elizabeth never trusted anyone either. Always had her separate accounts and private arrangements. He shook his head. Fine. You win this round. I'll sign your agreement. The sudden capitulation caught me off guard. I had expected more resistance, more negotiation. My mother looked equally surprised, turning to him with widened eyes. Richard, shouldn't we consult with— No, he cut her off. Eleanor has made her position clear. We'll sign. He picked up the fountain pen from the side table and scrawled his signature on the document with a flourish that conveyed both compliance and contempt. My mother hesitated briefly, then added her own signature beneath his, her hand less steady. I accepted the document, reviewing their signatures carefully before placing it back in my portfolio. Thank you. I'll have copies sent to you tomorrow. Is that all? My father asked, his voice brittle with barely contained anger. Or would you like to search the house for other imagined conspiracies before dinner? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. I wouldn't normally check messages during a family conversation, but something, intuition perhaps, or simply the suspicious timing, prompted me to glance at the screen. The email was from Nathan at First Boston Trust, automated and brief. Confirmation of wire transfer, $3.7 million from Blackwell Family Trust to Cayman Islands account, GL 77294661. I felt a cold wash of realization. My father's quick capitulation hadn't been surrender. It had been distraction. While we'd been confronting them in the living room, a significant transfer had been initiated from the family trust. What have you done? I asked, turning the phone screen toward my father, displaying the notification. His expression revealed nothing, but a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed satisfaction. I haven't done anything that exceeds my authority as trustee of the family accounts. You're transferring nearly $4 million to the Caymans while signing an agreement promising no further financial maneuvers? I maintained my composure despite the escalation. That's a direct violation of what you just signed. The transfer was initiated yesterday, he replied smoothly. The timing is unfortunate but wholly coincidental. It was a lie, and we both knew it. The agreement specified that any financial transfers initiated within 7 days prior to signing would be subject to review and potential reversal. This invalidates your signatures, I said, gathering my portfolio. We'll proceed with legal action tomorrow as planned. Lauren, who had been watching this exchange with growing horror, suddenly stood. Stop it. Both of you, just stop. Her voice cracked with emotion. This isn't about grandmother's wishes or legal documents anymore. This is about winning at any cost. She turned to our father. Dad, did you really try to access Ellie's account? Did you really transfer money today to avoid the agreement? For the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty flicker across my father's face. Lauren had always been his ally, his defender. Her questioning represented a crack in the unified front he'd always maintained. Lauren, you don't understand the complexities. Just answer the question, she insisted, tears forming in her eyes. Yes or no? The room fell silent as we all waited for his response. The grandfather clock ticked heavily in the corner, marking the seconds of this pivotal moment. My father looked from Lauren to me, then to my mother, seeking support or perhaps a way out. Finding none, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, a cold, calculating mask that revealed the man behind the paternal facade. This conversation is over, he announced, standing abruptly. Eleanor, I think it's best if you leave. We'll have our attorneys contact yours tomorrow. The escalation was complete. What had begun as a confrontation with the possibility of resolution had transformed into open financial warfare. As I gathered my things to leave, I realized that this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about the fundamental nature of our family relationships, built on manipulation and control rather than trust and equity. The first battle had been fought to a draw. The war, however, was just beginning. The next morning dawned with a clarity that belied the chaos unfolding behind closed doors. I arrived at Abigail's office at 7:30 a.m., the leather portfolio now supplemented with documentation of the Cayman, wire transfer, and a detailed account of the previous evening's confrontation. "This changes our approach," Abigail said after reviewing everything. Her office overlooked the public garden, the early sunlight illuminating the changing leaves. "The transfer is a clear attempt to shield assets before potential litigation. It strengthens our case but complicates recovery. Can we stop it?" I asked. "Possibly. I'll file for an emergency injunction this morning." She made a note on her legal pad. "More importantly, this demonstrates a pattern of deceptive financial behavior that extends beyond your grandmother's bequest. We should expand our investigation to include the Blackwell Family Foundation and other family trusts." I nodded, the weight of escalation settling around my shoulders. This wasn't the outcome I'd hoped for, but it was the one my parents had chosen, with their actions. "There's something else to consider," Abigail added, her expression serious. "Once we file these motions, this becomes a matter of public record. The Blackwell name carries significant weight in Boston. Are you prepared for potential publicity?" The question gave me pause. Despite everything, I had never intended this. To become public, had never wanted to expose family matters to outside scrutiny. But my parents' actions had eliminated more discreet options. "I'm prepared," I said finally. "The truth matters more than appearances." "Good, then let's proceed." She gathered the documents, her efficiency reassuring. "I'll have everything filed by noon. In the meantime, secure your personal accounts and prepare for potential blowback. Family financial disputes often get messy in unexpected ways." Her warning proved prescient sooner than either of us anticipated. By the time I reached my office, my assistant May was waiting with an unusual expression, concern mixed with professional. "Restraint. Everything okay?" I asked as she followed me into my office. "The management committee has requested your presence at an emergency meeting, 10 o'clock in the main boardroom." She hesitated. "Henderson Walsh from compliance will be there." I set my bag down slowly, processing the implications. Henderson. Walsh's involvement meant this wasn't a routine meeting. Compliance officers attended management discussions only when regulatory or reputational risks were being assessed. "Did they indicate the subject?" I asked, though I already suspected. "No. But—" May lowered her voice. "Aaron from legal received a call from Blackwell Memorial Hospital's general counsel this morning. I overheard him mentioning your name." Blackwell Memorial, the hospital where my father served as chief of cardiology, named for my grandfather who had been its director for 30 years. The family connection ran deep, as did the hospital's relationship with Hawthorne Capital Partners. We managed their endowment, their pension fund, and several key physicians' investment portfolios. "Thank you for the heads up," I said, maintaining my composure. "Please clear my calendar until noon." The 2 hours before the meeting passed in a blur of preparation. I reviewed client files, confirming that all my work was impeccably documented and compliant. I spoke briefly with Abigail, alerting her to this new development. Finally, I crafted a concise summary of the family situation, focusing on the financial improprieties rather than personal grievances. At precisely 10 a.m., I entered the boardroom with practiced calm. 8 people sat around the polished mahogany table. The CEO, Jonathan Hawthorne, the 4 division heads, Henderson from compliance, Aaron from legal, and somewhat surprisingly, Margot Chen, our director of client relations. Eleanor, Jonathan began without preamble. "We've received some concerning information this morning. Before we discuss it, I want to give you the opportunity to explain the situation in your own words." I noted the careful neutrality in his tone, neither accusatory nor supportive. Jonathan was a shrewd businessman who had built Hawthorne Capital from a boutique advisory firm into a respected institution. He wouldn't take sides until he'd assessed all angles. "Thank you, Jonathan," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "I presume this concerns the legal action I've initiated regarding my family's financial matters." Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "More specifically, it concerns allegations made by Richard Blackwell about your professional conduct. He's claimed you've misused confidential financial information obtained through your position here to pursue a personal vendetta." So that was their angle, attacking my professional integrity to undermine the legal proceedings. I had anticipated something along these lines, though not quite so quickly. "That's categorically false," I stated. "All information regarding my family's financial improprieties came through legitimate legal channels, bank investigations, forensic accounting, and my grandmother's personal records. Nothing was obtained through Hawthorne resources or connections." I distributed copies of the summary I'd prepared, which included a timeline establishing when and how I'd obtained each piece of evidence. "You'll note that my position at Hawthorne is irrelevant to these proceedings. This is a private family matter that happens to involve financial malfeasance." Jonathan reviewed the document carefully. "Richard Blackwell has been a significant institutional client for over 15 years. He's suggesting that your actions constitute a conflict of interest that could jeopardize that relationship." "With respect," I countered, "the conflict here is not of my making. Dr. Blackwell attempted to access an offshore account through fraudulent means, then retaliated when that attempt failed. His current accusations are a continuation of that pattern, using whatever leverage is available to avoid accountability." Margot Chen spoke up. "The hospital's endowment represents nearly $300 million under management. If they were to terminate our relationship because of this situation, the financial impact would be substantial." It was a valid concern from a business perspective, and one I had anticipated. "I understand the institutional considerations, Margot. However, there's another aspect to consider. If the firm suppresses legitimate legal action to protect a client relationship, particularly one involving documented fraud, what message does that send about our integrity?" Aaron from legal cleared his throat. "Eleanor raises a fair point. If her allegations are substantiated and the documentation appears comprehensive, the firm could face greater reputational risk by appearing to shield a client from legitimate scrutiny than by supporting an employee's pursuit of legal recourse." The room fell silent as everyone considered the competing interests at stake. Finally, Jonathan leaned forward. "Here's where we stand. First, Eleanor, we need absolute assurance that no Hawthorne resources, information, or connections were utilized in your investigation. Second, this legal action must remain strictly separate from your professional responsibilities. Third, client. Relationships potentially affected by this situation will be temporarily reassigned to avoid even the appearance of conflict." It was a reasonable position, protecting the firm while neither condemning nor endorsing my actions. I nodded my agreement. "There's one more thing," Jonathan added. "Richard Blackwell has scheduled a press conference for this afternoon. The topic wasn't specified, but given the timing, the implication was clear. My father was taking this public." "Thank you for the warning," I said, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the internal shock. A press conference represented a significant escalation, one that would thrust private matters into public view regardless of the legal outcomes. As the meeting concluded, Margot approached me privately. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling this with remarkable composure. But be prepared. Family financial disputes that spill into public view rarely leave anyone unscathed." Her concern seemed genuine, but something in her phrasing caught my attention. "You sound like you have personal experience with this kind of situation. A shadow crossed her face. Let's just say I understand the complexities of family betrayal. If you need someone to talk to outside of legal channels, my door is open. I thanked her and returned to my office, where 3 voice messages awaited. Me? The first was from Lauren, her voice tight with tension. Ellie, please call me. Dad's doing something drastic. I tried to talk him out of it, but he won't listen. The second was from Abigail. Injunction granted. The Cayman transfer has been frozen pending further legal review. Call me immediately about next steps. The third was from an unfamiliar number, but the voice was instantly recognizable. Marcus. Eleanor, Lauren doesn't know I'm calling. Your father is planning to announce a major donation to Blackwell Memorial this afternoon, the same amount he tried to transfer to the Caymans. It's being framed as a family legacy gift, with a strong emphasis on Lauren's involvement and your absence. I thought you should know. I checked the time. 11:45 a.m. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m., barely 2 hours away. My father wasn't just taking this public. He was actively constructing a narrative that would cast him as the generous patriarch and me as the ungrateful, absent daughter. What had begun as a private confrontation in a Beacon Hill brownstone was about to become front-page news in Boston, a public exposure that would change everything. The press conference was scheduled at Blackwell Memorial Hospital's Houghton Auditorium, a space typically reserved for major medical announcements and prestigious lectures. My father had chosen his venue carefully, surrounding himself with the institutional gravitas that had defined his professional life. I had 2 hours to decide how to respond. A direct counter-appearance would escalate the situation further, potentially, seeming reactive rather than strategic. Silence, on the other hand, would cede the narrative entirely to my parents. I called Abigail first, explaining the situation as I gathered my things to leave the office. This changes our immediate priorities, she said, her voice crisp with focus. We need statements prepared for media inquiries, and we should consider having our own announcement ready if necessary. What about the injunction? I asked, referring to the frozen Cayman transfer. Still in place, but your father's team will likely challenge it immediately. The press conference is probably designed to create public pressure against your legal actions, casting himself as the philanthropist, and you as obstructing charitable contributions. The strategy was shrewd, I had to admit. By publicly committing the disputed funds to the hospital, my father was creating a situation where my legal actions could be portrayed as harming a beloved community institution rather than addressing family fraud. I need eyes and ears at that press conference, I told Abigail. Someone discreet but reliable. I'll send my associate David. He won't be recognized, and he's excellent at detailed documentation. Next, I called Marcus back, stepping into an empty conference room for privacy. Thank you for the warning, I said when he answered. Do you know any specifics about the announcement? They're positioning it as establishing the Lauren Blackwell Young Innovators Program at the hospital, a research initiative for early career cardiologists. Your father's using the family foundation funds and the money he tried to transfer yesterday. Lauren's uncomfortable with the whole thing, especially her name being attached, but she's being pressured to attend and speak. The information was valuable but raised another question. Why are you telling me this, Marcus? It potentially puts your relationship with Lauren at risk. He paused before answering. I told you I've seen this pattern before. My father did something similar during my parents' divorce. Used charitable donations to shield assets and craft a public image that made my mother look greedy when she challenged it. The courts eventually ruled in her favor, but by then the public narrative was set. She was the villain, he was the generous benefactor. It destroyed her. His motivation rang true, personal experience creating empathy for a parallel situation. I appreciate your candor. Is there anything else I should know? Just that your father has been making calls to every board member and influential doctor at the hospital, solidifying support before the announcement. And Lauren mentioned that your mother has been reaching out to family friends. apparently sharing a very specific version of events. After thanking him again, I made one final call, to Lauren herself. She answered immediately, her voice hushed as if speaking from a place where she might be overheard. "Ellie, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I got your message." I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I understand there's a press conference this afternoon." "It's not right what they're doing," she said, surprising me with her directness. "Using the money this way, putting my name on it without really asking me. Dad says it's to secure the family legacy, but it feels like something else." "It is something else," I confirmed. "It's an attempt to publicly reframe the dispute and create pressure against the legal actions I've initiated." She was silent for a moment. "After you left last night, things got intense. Dad was furious about the injunction. He said you'd forced his hand, that now he had to establish the narrative before she does." "And what do you think, Lauren?" I asked, genuinely curious about where she stood now that the situation had escalated so dramatically. Her voice dropped, even lower. I think I've been used as a prop in something I don't fully understand. Dad keeps saying this is all about protecting me, about my future, but it feels more like I'm being positioned as the good daughter to highlight you as the bad one." It was the most insight Lauren had ever shown into our family dynamics, and it suggested a growing awareness that might prove significant. "Will you be speaking at the press conference?" I asked. "They've prepared remarks for me," she admitted. "Just a short statement about being honored to continue the family's commitment to medicine and research." "And if you choose not to deliver those remarks?" She inhaled sharply. "I don't know if I can do that, Ellie. You know how Dad gets when his plans are disrupted." I did know. Richard Blackwell's displeasure was a force that had shaped family decisions for decades, subtle but relentless pressure that made opposition seem impossible. "Whatever you decide, Lauren, I understand," I said, meaning it. "This isn't your battle, even though you've been placed in the middle of it." "What are you going to do?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm still deciding. But I won't let false narratives stand unchallenged." After ending the call, I stood at the window of the conference room, looking out over the Boston skyline. The city continued its normal Tuesday rhythm, unaware of the private drama unfolding within one of its prominent families. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan at First Boston Trust. "Unusual activity on Blackwell Family Foundation accounts. Multiple outgoing transfers initiated since morning. Thought you should know." The betrayal was deepening, becoming more complex with each passing hour. My father wasn't just planning a strategic press conference. He was actively moving foundation assets, perhaps attempting to circumvent the injunction by transferring funds through different channels. I forwarded the message to Abigail, then opened my email to find multiple new messages related to the unfolding situation. Julian Pierce from Hammond and Associates. Additional documents discovered in Elizabeth Blackwell's legal files. Appears to be correspondence regarding concerns about Richard's management of family foundation funds. Available for review immediately. Patricia Winters, the forensic accountant. Preliminary analysis of Blackwell Family Foundation tax filings shows concerning patterns of intra-family transactions and potential misrepresentation of charitable expenditures. Full report by end of day. And most unexpectedly, an email from Margot Chen at Hawthorne Capital. "Eleanor, having reviewed your documentation more thoroughly, I feel compelled to share something relevant. The Blackwell Family Foundation attempted to withdraw their entire endowment portfolio from our management this morning. Compliance has placed a temporary hold pending review. I shouldn't be telling you this, but given the circumstances, it seemed important." Each message revealed new layers of what was looking increasingly like a systematic effort to shield assets and control the narrative. The private financial betrayal that had begun with my grandmother's bequest was expanding into a much larger pattern of questionable financial management. As the press conference approached, I made my decision. Not to appear personally, that would play into my father's framing of a bitter family dispute, but to ensure the full truth was available to counter whatever narrative he constructed. I called Abigail back. I need your team to prepare a comprehensive statement addressing both the original inheritance issue and these new financial developments. Factual, documented, unemotional. Have it ready to distribute to media outlets immediately following the press conference. And the foundation transfers, Nathan mentioned? Request an emergency extension of the injunction to cover all Blackwell family-related entities, not just the personal accounts. If there's a pattern of questionable financial management, it needs to be frozen before assets disappear completely. Finally, I called May at my office. I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Family emergency. Already done, she replied, her efficient response reminding me why I valued her so highly. And Ms. Blackwell? There's a courier package that just arrived for you. From your grandmother's former housekeeper, Margaret Winters. The note says it's urgent. Margaret, a quiet, dignified woman who had managed my grandmother's household for over 30 years. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. Have it sent to my apartment, I instructed. I'll be working from home this afternoon. As I ended the call, the realization settled heavily that what had begun as a private inheritance dispute had expanded into something far more comprehensive, a full exposure of decades of family financial manipulation. Whatever my father announced at the press conference would be merely one more move in an increasingly complex game of truth and consequences. The betrayal wasn't just deepening. It was revealing foundations that had been rotting for years beneath. A veneer of respectability and family unity. The package from Margaret Winters was waiting when I arrived at my apartment. A weathered cardboard box sealed with packing tape, unremarkable except for the careful handwriting on the label. I set it aside momentarily, needing to focus on the imminent press conference. I turned on the local news station, which had already begun coverage outside Blackwell Memorial Hospital. The reporter's voice provided background as cameras panned across the hospital's imposing granite facade. A major announcement expected from Dr. Richard Blackwell, chief of cardiology and son of the hospital's namesake. Sources indicate this will involve a significant financial commitment to expand the hospital's research capabilities. I muted the television and pulled out my laptop, logging into the secure portal Abigail had established for our case materials. New documents appeared regularly as her team assembled evidence and prepared responses. The latest addition was a preliminary injunction extending the asset freeze to include the Blackwell Family Foundation accounts, granted just 20 minutes earlier by Judge Harrington of the Suffolk County Circuit Court. My phone rang. Abigail's associate David, now positioned in the hospital auditorium. They're about to begin, he reported. Full press turnout, hospital board members, major donors. Your sister just arrived, looks uncomfortable. Your father's speaking with the hospital. Director seems confident. Your mother's working the room, very engaged with the society crowd. Any unexpected attendees I should know about? I asked. Several of your cousins are here. And I recognize Jonathan Hawthorne from your firm in the back row. That was surprising. Jonathan hadn't mentioned attending when we spoke earlier. I wondered whose side he was evaluating, or if he was simply gathering information to protect Hawthorne Capital's interests. Keep the line open, I instructed. I want to hear everything. I unmuted the television as the cameras shifted to the auditorium interior. My father approached the podium, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He carried himself with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention in medical theaters and boardrooms alike. Good afternoon, he began, his voice carrying the warm, authoritative tone he reserved for public appearances. Thank you all for joining us on this momentous occasion for both Blackwell Memorial Hospital and our family. He proceeded with practiced charm, outlining the hospital's history and the Blackwell family's long-standing commitment to medical advancement. As he spoke, I could see Lauren seated to one side, her posture rigid, her expression a carefully maintained mask of pleasant attention. Today, I'm proud to announce the establishment of the Lauren Blackwell Young Innovators Program, my father continued, gesturing toward my sister. A $5 million initiative that will fund breakthrough research by early career cardiologists, right here at Blackwell Memorial. The amount was noteworthy, $1.3 million more than what had been attempted in the Cayman transfer. He was escalating, committing additional funds to strengthen his position. This program honors not only our family's legacy, but specifically the vision of the next generation, represented by my daughter Lauren, who embodies the Blackwell commitment to supporting medical excellence and innovation. The camera panned to Lauren, who offered a tight smile as applause filled the auditorium. The Young Innovators Program will be administered through the Blackwell Family Foundation, with Lauren serving as its first director, ensuring our family's values guide this important initiative. This was a new detail, positioning Lauren in an official role, further entangling her in the scheme while creating another justification for moving foundation assets under her nominal control. My father's expression grew more solemn as he continued. Family legacy is sacred to us Blackwells. Each generation has a responsibility to build upon what came before, to honor those traditions while creating new opportunities for growth and service. The subtext was clear to anyone aware of the underlying dispute, framing his actions as preserving legacy rather than manipulating assets. In today's world, he continued, his tone shifting subtly, we sometimes see younger generations prioritize individual advancement over family commitments. Financial success becomes an end unto itself, rather than a means to continue important traditions of philanthropy and community investment. There it was, the first direct, if unnamed, reference to me, casting me as the selfish individualist more concerned with personal wealth than family legacy or community benefit. The Blackwell family has always believed that privilege comes with responsibility to give back, to serve, to honor the institutions that shaped us. This gift represents our unwavering commitment to those values. As he invited Lauren to the podium, David whispered through the phone line. Several reporters are checking their phones. I think the news about the extended injunction is starting to reach them. Lauren approached the microphone with visible hesitation. Her prepared remarks were brief and clearly scripted. Expressions of gratitude, references to family tradition, commitment to excellence. But something in her delivery felt mechanical, her usual social grace replaced by a stiffness that suggested internal conflict. When she finished and returned to her seat, my father resumed control of the presentation, inviting the hospital director to speak. As the director launched into effusive thanks, the first reporter's hand rose. Dr. Blackwell, can you address reports that assets of the Blackwell Family Foundation have been frozen by court order this afternoon? A momentary flicker of surprise crossed my father's face before his practiced composure returned. I'm not aware of any such action. This gift represents our family's ongoing commitment to medical research, continuing a tradition established by my father. Another reporter stood. Sources indicate your daughter Eleanor Blackwell has initiated legal proceedings regarding family accounts, including foundation assets. How does that affect today's announcement? My father's expression hardened almost, imperceptibly. Family discussions about estate planning are private matters that have no bearing on our philanthropic commitments. The Foundation's mission continues regardless of any temporary administrative reviews. The careful phrasing, administrative reviews rather than legal proceedings, was deliberate minimization, an attempt to downplay the significance of the injunctions. A third reporter pressed further. Dr. Blackwell, court documents filed this morning allege attempted fraud regarding offshore accounts established by your late mother. Do you have any response to these allegations? Now the control began to slip. My father's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around the edges of the podium. Those allegations are entirely baseless, a misinterpretation of standard estate management. It's unfortunate that private family matters are being distorted in this way. The hospital director stepped forward, attempting to redirect. We're here today to celebrate a transformative gift for medical research. But the questions continued, increasingly focused on the legal proceedings rather than the donation announcement. Through the phone, I could hear the rising tension in the room as my father's carefully orchestrated narrative began to unravel. Finally, he raised his hands for silence. "Let me address this directly," he said, his voice taking on an edge of righteous indignation. "My daughter Eleanor has always charted her own course, sometimes at odds with family traditions. Recently, she has misinterpreted standard financial management decisions regarding her grandmother's estate." He paused, shaking his head with practiced regret. Rather than discussing her concerns within the family, she has chosen a more confrontational approach. It's disappointing, but it won't deter our family's commitment to this hospital and the patients it serves. The gaslighting was masterful, recasting legitimate legal challenges as emotional overreaction, positioning himself as the reasonable patriarch, continuing good works despite family drama. Today's announcement stands regardless of these distractions. The Lauren Blackwell Young Innovators Program will proceed as planned, continuing our family's legacy of service and excellence. As questions continued to fly, my mother appeared at my father's side, a unified front of dignified concern. Lauren remained seated, her expression now visibly strained. I ended the call with David and turned to my laptop, where Abigail had sent the prepared statement we had developed. It was comprehensive but restrained, focusing on documented facts rather than emotional appeals. Recent legal actions regarding Blackwell family finances were initiated after discovering attempted access to private trust accounts using questionable documentation. These actions seek to preserve asset integrity while legal review proceeds, not to impede charitable giving. All allegations are supported by substantial evidence currently under court review. Ms. Blackwell remains committed to appropriate philanthropic support of medical research through proper, transparent channels. I approved it for immediate release to media outlets, knowing it would provide context for the increasingly chaotic press conference still unfolding on my television screen. Then, finally, I turned my attention to the package from Margaret Winters. Whatever it contained had been important enough for my grandmother's most trusted employee to send it directly to me at this critical juncture. I opened Margaret's package carefully, peeling back the tape to reveal several items nestled in crumpled newspaper, a small leather-bound book, a USB drive, and a handwritten note on cream stationery. "Dear Eleanor, I've held these items since your grandmother's passing, following her explicit instructions to wait until Eleanor needs them most. I believe that time has come. Elizabeth confided in me her concerns about your father's financial activities, particularly regarding the foundation. The journal contains her observations dating back 15 years. The drive holds copies of documents she removed from your father's study during his careless moments, records not found in the official foundation files. She wanted you protected, but also prepared if matters escalated. I've watched the situation unfold from a distance and feel I must honor her wishes now. With respect and concern, Margaret Winters." The journal's leather was soft with age, the pages filled with my grandmother's distinctive script. I opened to a random entry from 7 years earlier. March 17th. R continues to resist proper oversight of foundation investments. Board minutes sanitized again to remove questions raised by external trustee. C complicit as always, focusing on public appearances, while ignoring substantive governance issues. Transferred additional personal funds to E's secured account today. Whatever happens to the foundation, she at least will be protected. I flipped through more entries, each documenting a pattern of concerning behavior. Questionable investment decisions, resistance to standard auditing procedures, strategic replacement of independent board members with family friends and dependents. With growing unease, I inserted the USB drive into my laptop. It contained dozens of files meticulously organized by date and category. Financial statements, internal memos, email, exchanges between my father and various financial institutions. Among them was a folder labeled Offshore Structures, containing detailed records of accounts in the Caymans, Singapore, and Liechtenstein, accounts never mentioned in the Foundation's official disclosures. As I scanned the documents, the full wow picture began to emerge. The Blackwell Family Foundation had served not just as a charitable entity, but as a sophisticated financial shelter. Donations were routinely inflated for tax purposes. Foundation assets were used to secure personal loans. International accounts masked transfers between family-controlled entities. I sat back, a wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't just about my inheritance or even my grandmother's bequest. It was systematic financial manipulation spanning decades, orchestrated primarily by my father with my mother's knowledge and tacit approval. The phone rang, startling me from this disturbing revelation. It was Abigail. "The press conference has ended," she reported. "Your father refused further questions and left through a side entrance. Your statement is circulating now, providing necessary context. But there's another development. The hospital board has called an emergency meeting." "Regarding the donation?" "Partially. There are concerns about potential reputational damage if they accept funds currently under legal scrutiny. But there's more. A board member has apparently raised questions about previous Blackwell Foundation grants to the hospital's research department. Specifically, whether those funds were properly administered and reported. The dominoes were beginning to fall. What had begun as a private inheritance dispute was expanding to encompass the Foundation's entire operation, potentially exposing years of questionable practices. "I need to show you what I've just received," I told her. It's extensive. Documentation going back years, detailing concerning patterns in the Foundation's management. "I'll come to you," she decided. "This material shouldn't be transmitted electronically if it's as sensitive as you suggest." After ending the call, I turned back to the television, where breaking news banners now accompanied the coverage of the aborted press conference. The carefully constructed public image my parents had maintained for decades was cracking, revealing the complicated reality beneath. My phone buzzed with incoming messages. "Lauren, Dad's furious." Mom's locked herself in her study. "What's happening, Ellie?" Margot Chen from Hawthorne. "Emergency partners meeting called for 5 p.m. Your situation is the only agenda item. You should know Jonathan seems to be positioning himself as mediator rather than advocate Jonathan himself. We need to speak before the partners meeting." My office, 4:30. This has escalated beyond what any of us anticipated. And most surprisingly, Marcus. Lauren needs someone to talk to who isn't involved in all this. She's more shaken than I've ever seen her. "Would you meet with her? Neutral location. Just the two of you?" The walls were closing in from all directions. Professional consequences, family fallout, ethical obligations, all converging in a perfect storm of crisis. For the first time since this began, I felt a profound weariness settle over me. Not just fatigue from recent events, but a bone-deep exhaustion from years of navigating family dynamics that I now understood had been fundamentally corrupt. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by evidence of my family's deception, and for a brief moment allowed myself to feel the full weight of it. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a betrayal of trust, of values, of the basic honesty that should exist between family members. They hadn't just lied about money. They had constructed an entire false reality and expected me to live within it without question. This was my lowest point. Not because I doubted my actions or the evidence before me, but because I finally comprehended the full extent of the deception that had shaped my family life. It wasn't just about being the less favored daughter. It was about being deliberately kept outside a circle of financial manipulation that had defined our family's operations for decades. I looked at my grandmother's journal again, turning to one of the final entries made just weeks before her death. Eleanor will face difficult choices when the truth emerges. The foundation, the hospital, the family name, all may be compromised by Richard's actions. I've provided what protection I can through the Offshore Trust, but the larger reckoning will fall to her. She has the strength for it, though the personal cost will be high. My hope is that Lauren eventually sees clearly and stands with her sister. The Blackwell legacy should be truth and integrity, not appearance and deception. My grandmother had anticipated this moment, had known that eventually, the carefully constructed facade would crumble. She had prepared me as best she could, providing both financial independence and now, through Margaret, the evidence needed to address the broader deception. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Abigail waiting patiently, leather briefcase in hand. It was time to move from revelation to response, from processing betrayal to planning action. As I opened the door, my phone buzzed with a final message from my father. You've begun something that affects far more than your inheritance. The foundation supports dozens of research initiatives, educational programs, community outreach efforts. Are you prepared to see that all destroyed for the sake of your perceived grievance? Think carefully about your next steps. Some damage cannot be undone. It was a last attempt at manipulation, appealing to larger ethical considerations to shield personal misconduct. In the past, such appeals might have given me pause, might have activated the ingrained response to prioritize family reputation over personal concerns. But now, with my grandmother's documentation spread across my kitchen table and the pattern of deception fully exposed, I saw it for what it was. Not a legitimate ethical dilemma, but another attempt to use ostensibly noble purposes to mask self-serving actions. I showed Abigail the message as she settled at my table. She read it calmly, then looked up at me with steady resolve. This is the moment, Eleanor. Not just for your personal situation, but for the integrity of the foundation, the hospital, everything connected to the Blackwell name. How do you want to proceed? It was indeed the moment of decision, the lowest point from which any direction would now be upward, but each path carried different consequences. I could settle privately, allowing the foundation's issues to remain buried. I could pursue narrow justice focused only on my personal claims. Or I could address the full scope of what I'd discovered, regardless of the institutional and family implications. Looking at my grandmother's journal, the answer became clear. The Blackwell legacy she had valued wasn't about appearances or institutional prestige, it was about fundamental integrity. Preserving that true legacy required the courage to address the full extent of the deception, not just my personal portion of it. We proceed with complete transparency, I told Abigail. My inheritance, the foundation, all of it, whatever the consequences. Abigail nodded, a subtle glint of approval in her eyes. I suspected that would be your answer. Let's get to work. For the next hour, we spread the documents across my dining table, organizing them into categories of significance: personal trust issues, foundation governance problems, questionable financial transfers, tax considerations, and institutional conflicts of interest. The scope was daunting. Decades of financial maneuvering layered beneath a veneer of philanthropic respectability. We need to be strategic, Abigail advised, sorting through Margaret's documents. Addressing everything simultaneously could create chaos that ultimately serves no one's interests. We need a phased approach that addresses the most serious issues, first while preserving legitimate charitable functions. She was right. Simply exposing everything at once risked institutional collapse that would harm innocent beneficiaries of the Foundation's work: researchers, students, patients. The goal wasn't destruction but correction, not revenge but accountability. 3 tracks, I suggested, the outline of a plan forming. First, secure my grandmother's bequest and resolve the immediate inheritance issue. Second, address the foundation, Governance to ensure proper oversight going forward. Third, review past financial activities to determine if regulatory or tax authorities need to be informed. Abigail made notes as I spoke. The first track is well underway with the injunctions. For the second, we'll need to engage with other Foundation board members who aren't directly under your parents' influence. Any candidates? I considered the Foundation's current board composition. Robert Harrington. He's a longtime family friend but scrupulously ethical. He joined the board as a favor to my grandmother and has occasionally questioned my father's investment decisions. Good. And for the third track, we'll need specialized counsel for potential tax and regulatory issues. I have several recommendations, all with appropriate discretion. As we refined the strategy, my phone rang. Jonathan Hawthorne, likely calling about our scheduled meeting before the partners' gathering. I put him on speaker. Eleanor, I'm calling to suggest we move our discussion to my home rather than the office. This situation has attracted significant attention, and I think more privacy would benefit our conversation. The change in venue was telling. Moving from the professional environment of his office to the personal space of his home suggested he viewed this as more than just a business matter. I appreciate that, Jonathan. What time? Let's keep it at 4:30. My driver can collect you at 4:15 if that's convenient. After I agreed and ended the call, Abigail raised an eyebrow. Interesting. He's creating distance from the institutional setting of Hawthorne Capital. That could be protective of you or the firm? Or both, I suggested. Jonathan has always been careful about separating personal and professional contexts when complex situations arise. We returned to our strategic planning, developing specific action items for each track. By 3:30, we had a comprehensive approach outlined. For Track 1, Grandmother's Bequest. Maintain the existing injunctions, depose my father regarding the attempted access to the Cayman account, and formally document my grandmother's intentions through Julian Pierce's testimony and her personal records. For Track 2, Foundation Governance. Approach Robert Harrington confidentially to discuss governance concerns, request an independent audit of Foundation practices, and develop a proposal for restructured oversight that would preserve legitimate charitable work. For Track 3, Regulatory Compliance. Engage specialized counsel to review tax filings and offshore structures. Prepare for potential voluntary disclosure if serious violations were confirmed, and document which Foundation activities were legitimate despite governance issues. This approach balances accountability with preservation, Abigail summarized. It addresses the serious issues while providing a path forward for the Foundation's legitimate work. I nodded, feeling the first sense of clarity since this crisis began. It's not about destroying what my family built. It's about ensuring it actually operates according to the principles it claims to uphold. Exactly. And speaking of upholding principles, what about Lauren's message? Do you want to meet with her? I had been considering this question throughout our planning session. Despite her complicity in my parents' narrative, Lauren's recent messages suggested growing discomfort with their actions. The conversation with Marcus had indicated she was genuinely distressed by the press conference and its aftermath. Yes, I'll meet her. She may be realizing that our parents' approach has drawn her into something more problematic than she understood. Just be cautious, Abigail advised. Family loyalty runs deep, and your parents may be applying significant pressure. After Abigail, left with copies of the most critical documents, I had 40 minutes before Jonathan's driver would arrive. I used the time to compose a response to Lauren, suggesting we meet the following morning at the Boston Public Garden. Neutral ground with enough privacy for conversation, but public enough to discourage dramatic confrontations. I also replied to Marcus, thanking him for his concern for Lauren and his continued insights. Whatever his initial motives for dating my sister, he had demonstrated unexpected integrity throughout this situation. At 4:10, my phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan's driver, informing me he was 5 minutes away. I gathered my essentials: notebook, phone, a small selection of key documents, and headed downstairs. The black Bentley that waited at the curb epitomized Jonathan Hawthorne's approach to life. Understated luxury that communicated success without ostentation. The driver, Nelson, greeted me with professional courtesy as he held the door. "Mr. Hawthorne is expecting you, Ms. Blackwell. We should arrive in approximately 15 minutes. The drive through Boston's late afternoon traffic provided a welcome opportunity to collect my thoughts. Jonathan Hawthorne was more than my employer. He had been a mentor since my return from London, recognizing potential in my investment approach that others had overlooked. His support had been instrumental in my rapid advancement at the firm. Now I was bringing complicated personal issues to his doorstep, potentially creating professional complications for the firm he had built over decades. I owed him both honesty and consideration of Hawthorne Capital's interests. Jonathan's home was a restored Victorian in Brookline, set back from the street behind mature maple trees. Nelson escorted me to the front door, which opened before we reached it. Jonathan himself stood in the doorway, dressed in casual attire rather than his usual impeccable suits. Another signal that this was a personal rather than professional conversation. "Eleanor, thank you for accommodating the change in venue," he said, gesturing me inside. "I thought we might speak more freely here." The interior was warm and tasteful, antique furniture balanced with modern art, bookshelves lined with volumes that showed actual use rather than decorative selection. He led me to a study at the back of the house, where a tray with tea service waited on a low table between comfortable leather chairs. "I attended your father's press conference," he began, pouring tea with practiced movements. "An impressive performance until it unraveled. The hospital board is in emergency session as we speak, deliberating whether to accept the proposed donation." I accepted the cup he offered. "And Hawthorne Capital? I imagine today's events have created concerns about the firm's relationship with the Blackwell entities." Jonathan leaned back, studying me with the same measured assessment he applied to investment opportunities. "The partners' meeting will address those concerns. Some are advocating for immediate separation from all Blackwell-related accounts to avoid potential reputational contagion. Others suggest a more nuanced approach." "And your position?" I asked directly. "I'm still determining it," he replied with characteristic candor. "Which is why I wanted to speak with you privately first. I need to understand what this is, Eleanor. Is it a family dispute that has unfortunately spilled into public view? Or is it something more fundamental about the Blackwell financial structures?" It was the critical question, one that would determine not just Jonathan's approach, but potentially my future at Hawthorne Capital. I could minimize, focusing solely on the inheritance issue, or I could share the fuller picture emerging from my grandmother's documentation. "It began as a family matter," I acknowledged, "but it has revealed more significant issues. The foundation appears to have been operating with concerning governance practices for years. There are offshore structures that may not have been properly disclosed to regulatory authorities. My grandmother documented her concerns extensively." Jonathan's expression remained neutral, but I noted the slight tension in his posture. "These are serious matters. Do you have documentation supporting these concerns?" "Substantial documentation. My attorney is reviewing it now to determine appropriate next steps." He nodded slowly. "And your intentions? Are you looking to expose everything regardless of consequences, or is there a more measured approach under consideration?" It was a fair question, addressing the fundamental choice between vindication and responsible resolution. I outlined the three-track strategy Abigail and I had developed, emphasizing the balanced approach that would address misconduct while preserving legitimate charitable functions. As I explained the plan, I saw his posture gradually relax, the tension in his shoulders easing. When I finished, he set down his teacup and leaned forward. "That's a responsible approach, Eleanor. It demonstrates maturity and principle, addressing serious issues without succumbing to scorched earth tactics." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "The partners' meeting will still be challenging. Your father has allies among our major clients, and some partners will be concerned about broader relationship implications. I understand. My personal situation shouldn't compromise the firm's position. He shook his head. That's not what I'm suggesting. Hawthorne Capital prides itself on integrity. It's why clients trust us with their wealth. If what you've discovered is substantiated, our ethical obligations may align with your personal interests, regardless of client relationships. It was an encouraging perspective, though I knew institutional considerations would ultimately prevail. In the partners' deliberations, Jonathan seemed to read my thoughts. I'll need to see the documentation eventually, he said. Not just for the firm's position, but because we may have compliance obligations of our own regarding the foundation. Accounts. I understand. Once my legal team has organized everything properly, I'll ensure you receive what you need. He nodded, satisfied with the commitment. One last question, Eleanor. Have you considered the personal cost of this path? Not financially, but in terms of family relationships? The question touched the aspect of this situation I had been compartmentalizing, the emotional implications of challenging my family so fundamentally. Despite their treatment of me, despite the evidence of misconduct, they were still my parents. Lauren's still my sister. The path I had chosen would permanently alter those relationships, possibly sever them entirely. I've considered it, I replied quietly. But my grandmother trusted me to uphold a legacy of integrity, not appearance. Sometimes preserving what matters most requires difficult choices. Jonathan studied me for a long moment, then nodded with what appeared to be both respect and concern. Then let's prepare for the partners' meeting. I think you'll find more support than you might expect. The Hawthorne Capital Partners meeting unfolded with the measured tension of high-stakes professional deliberation. 12 partners arranged. Around a polished conference table, Jonathan at its head, each face a study in calculated neutrality as I presented a carefully edited summary of the situation. I focused on documented facts rather than family dynamics. The attempted access to my grandmother's account using questionable documents, the foundation governance issues, the emergency injunctions currently in place. Throughout, I emphasized my commitment to addressing these matters through appropriate professional and legal channels, separate from my role at the firm. When I finished, Jonathan opened the floor for questions. They came rapidly, pointed but fair. What assurances can you provide that no Hawthorne resources were used in your investigation? How do you propose to manage client relationships affected by these proceedings? Have regulatory authorities been notified of potential compliance issues? I answered each directly, without defensiveness or embellishment. When all questions had been addressed, Jonathan asked me to step out while the partners deliberated. That waiting area outside the conference room offered a commanding view of Boston Harbor, lights from buildings across the water beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. I stood at the window, oddly calm despite the professional stakes. After confronting my family's decades of deception, a partner's vote seemed almost straightforward by comparison. 20 minutes later, Jonathan emerged alone. The partners have reached a decision, he said, gesturing for me to follow him to his office rather than returning to the conference room. Once seated across from his desk, he continued. Effective immediately, you'll take a paid leave of absence until the legal matters are resolved. All Blackwell-related accounts will be transferred to other advisors to avoid any appearance of conflict. The firm will cooperate fully with any legitimate investigative authorities while maintaining appropriate client confidentiality. It was essentially what I had expected, a balanced approach that protected the firm while neither condemning nor endorsing my actions. However, Jonathan added, his tone shifting subtly, I want to be clear about something the partners discussed, but won't be documented officially. If what you've uncovered is substantiated through legal proceedings, your standing at this firm will not be diminished. Integrity matters here, Eleanor, even when it creates short-term complications. The implicit support was unexpected and quietly meaningful. "Thank you, Jonathan." "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a hint of wry humor. "The coming weeks won't be easy. Your father has significant influence in Boston financial circles. There will be pressure, both professional and personal. I'm prepared for that." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "One more thing. Robert Harrington called me directly after the press conference today. He's concerned about the foundation and mentioned your grandmother had spoken to him about governance issues before her death. He may be a valuable ally in addressing the foundation's future." This confirmation of Robert's potential support was a significant development for our second strategic track. "Thank you for telling me." As I left Hawthorne Capital that evening, the weight of implementation settled firmly on my shoulders. The strategy was sound, the pieces moving into position, but now came the most challenging phase: sustained action in the face of mounting opposition and personal cost. Back at my apartment, I found multiple messages waiting. Lauren had confirmed our meeting in the public garden the next morning. Abigail reported that the hospital board had placed the proposed donation under review pending resolution of legal questions, effectively freezing my father's attempt to redirect the contested funds. Robert Harrington had reached out directly, requesting a confidential meeting regarding matters of mutual concern about the foundation. And most surprisingly, a brief email from my mother, the first direct communication since Sunday's confrontation. "Eleanor, whatever you believe about your father's actions, remember that institutions built over generations can be destroyed in moments. Some damage cannot be undone. Think carefully about the broader consequences of your choices." It was manipulation wrapped in concern, attempting to use my sense of responsibility against me. Yet beneath the tactical message, I detected something new, a note of genuine apprehension. My mother, always the guardian of appearances and family standing, was beginning to recognize that the carefully constructed Blackwell public image might not survive intact. I didn't respond to her email. Instead, I prepared for the next day's conversations with Lauren and Robert Harrington, interactions that would determine whether reconciliation and reform were possible, or if more adversarial measures would be necessary. The implementation had begun. Now, commitment would determine the outcome. The Boston Public Garden was quiet the next morning, mist rising from the pond as early joggers traced the winding paths. I arrived 20 minutes early, settling on a bench near the footbridge with a view of the entrance where Lauren would appear. Despite the serenity of the setting, my mind remained active, rehearsing different approaches to the coming conversation. Lauren was both victim and participant in our parents' manipulations, drawn into their narrative while being used as leverage against me. My goal wasn't to alienate her further, but to create space for her to make independent choices based on the full truth. She arrived precisely at 8, wearing a camel coat similar to the one she'd worn at Fleming's, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired, the polished exterior that she typically maintained showing signs of strain. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat beside me, leaving a careful distance between us. "How are you holding up?" I asked, genuinely concerned. Despite everything, she gave a half-hearted laugh. "Honestly, terrible. Dad's barely speaking to anyone, just locked in his study making calls. Mom's in damage control mode with their social circle. The hospital board has put the donation on hold, which Dad's taking as a personal affront. And Marcus..." She hesitated. "Marcus and I had a serious conversation about what he overheard and what it means." "And what does it mean to you, Lauren?" She stared out at the pond, gathering her thoughts. "It means I've been used as a prop in something I don't fully understand. This program with my name on it. I never asked for that. I never wanted to be positioned as the good daughter in some family financial drama. It was the most self-awareness she'd ever expressed about our family dynamics." I remained silent, giving her space to continue. The thing is, Ellie, I still don't know what to believe. Dad says you're distorting things, that grandmother's accounts were always meant to be part of the family estate, that you're causing unnecessary damage to protect your personal interests. And what do you think? I asked. She turned to face me, directly. I think there are things I haven't been told. Things about the foundation, about grandmother's wishes. Marcus. She hesitated again. Marcus suggested I should ask you directly what evidence you actually have, rather than accepting Dad's characterization. It was a significant step, seeking information independently rather than accepting our father's narrative without question. I opened my bag and removed a thin folder containing select documents, a copy of my grandmother's letter, bank confirmation of the attempted access to the Cayman account, and foundation financial records showing concerning patterns of asset movement. These are copies, I explained. The originals and many more documents are with my attorney. I'm not asking you to choose sides blindly, Lauren. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and think for yourself. She took the folder hesitantly. What happens now? With the legal proceedings? That depends partly on how our parents respond. I've proposed a resolution that would address the immediate inheritance issue and create proper governance for the foundation going forward. It would allow the legitimate charitable work to continue while ensuring proper oversight. And if they don't agree, then the courts will decide, and potentially regulatory authorities for the foundation issues. Lauren nodded slowly, absorbing the implications. And us? What happens to us, to you and me? The question touched the core of what was at stake beyond money and legal proceedings, the future of our relationship as sisters. That depends on choices we both make, I said carefully. I don't hold you responsible for our parents' actions. Lauren, you've been positioned and influenced just as I was in different ways. What matters now is whether we can see each other clearly, without their narrative shaping our relationship. Tears formed in her eyes, surprising both of us. Lauren rarely showed vulnerability, having learned early the family expectation of composed appearances. I don't know who I am outside of their expectations, she admitted quietly. The perfect daughter, the artistic one who needs protection. The social success story. I've played that role so long I'm not sure what's left if I step away from it. It was the most honest she had ever been with me, perhaps with herself as well. I reached out and took her hand. The first genuine physical connection between us. In years. You're more than the role they assigned you, just as I am. Maybe that's what we both need to discover. She squeezed my hand briefly before releasing it, brushing away tears with an embarrassed smile. I should go. I need time to read these, to think. But Ellie? Thank you for meeting me, for talking to me like an adult capable of understanding, not just someone to be managed. As I watched her walk away, folder clutched against her chest, I felt the first tentative hope that regardless of legal outcomes, something valuable might be salvaged from this painful process. A relationship with my sister based on truth rather than prescribed roles and managed narratives. Later that morning, my meeting with Robert Harrington at his law office provided further confirmation that resolution was possible. As a longtime Foundation board member with legitimate concerns about governance, he offered a bridge between accountability and continuation of the Foundation's valuable work. Elizabeth spoke to me about her concerns several times, he confirmed, his expression grave. I raised questions when I could, but Richard controlled the board composition so thoroughly that meaningful oversight was difficult. And now? I asked. Now there's an opportunity for proper reform. Several board members have contacted me privately, since the press conference, expressing similar concerns about governance and financial management. If handled correctly, this could lead to a restructured foundation with legitimate independence and proper controls. It was the best possible outcome for the second track of our strategy, reform rather than destruction, preserving valuable charitable work while ensuring proper oversight. By afternoon, The path to resolution was becoming clearer across all fronts. The immediate inheritance issue would likely be settled through legal proceedings, with the evidence overwhelmingly supporting my grandmother's intentions. The foundation would undergo significant governance reform, possibly with Robert as interim chair during the transition. The regulatory questions regarding past financial practices remained the most uncertain, dependent on the full assessment of potential violations and appropriate remedial measures. The consequences, both institutional and personal, would be substantial but not apocalyptic. The Blackwell name would continue, though with a different meaning and legacy than my parents had cultivated. The truth, long obscured beneath layers of manipulation and appearance, would finally shape the future. 3 months after that morning, conversation with Lauren in the Boston Public Garden, I sat in the newly renovated boardroom of the Blackwell Foundation. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the faces of the restructured board, a diverse group of financial experts, medical professionals, and community representatives, with Robert Harrington serving as interim chairman. The settlement had been finalized 2 weeks earlier. My grandmother's bequest remained entirely mine, as she had intended. My parents had relinquished control of the foundation following a comprehensive audit that revealed years of governance failures. No criminal charges had been filed, but significant tax penalties and compliance remediation had been required. My father had resigned his position as chief of cardiology at Blackwell Memorial, citing personal reasons, though the hospital board's private ultimatum had left him little choice. My parents had retreated to their summer home in Maine, maintaining minimal contact with Boston society that had once been the center of their lives. As the board meeting concluded, Robert approached me with quiet satisfaction. The Young Innovators Program is ready for its first grant cycle. We've received applications from 32 promising cardiologists, just as your grandmother would have wanted. The program had been redesigned and renamed. Now the Elizabeth Blackwell Innovation Fund, honoring my grandmother's true legacy rather than serving as a vehicle for family dynamics. The restructured foundation operated with complete transparency, its mission refined to focus on medical research and education. Access outside, Lauren waited, having attended her first meeting as a non-voting observer. In the months since our garden conversation, she had undergone her own transformation, moving out of the family-owned apartment, declining financial support from our parents, and building genuine independence for perhaps the first time in her life. That was enlightening, she said as we walked toward Newberry Street. I never realized how much actual work goes into responsible philanthropy. It's not just fundraisers and ribbon cuttings, I agreed with a smile. No, it's governance and accountability and impact measurement. She shook her head. I'm not sure I'm ready for board responsibilities yet, but I want to understand it better. Her willing step back from immediate involvement represented significant growth, recognition of her own limitations, and the need for proper preparation before assuming such responsibilities. As we settled at an outdoor cafe table, I felt a sense of completion unlike anything I'd experienced in the tumultuous months before. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. My relationship with our parents remained distant and strained, perhaps irreparably so. The family name had weathered significant public scrutiny. The personal cost had been substantial, yet something fundamental had been preserved that transcended financial assets or institutional structures: the integrity that my grandmother had valued above appearances, the truth she had documented so carefully for the day when it would be needed. I've been thinking about grandmother a lot, Lauren said, as if reading my thoughts. About how she saw things clearly when everyone else was caught up in perceptions and positions. I wish I'd known her better, the real her, not just the role she played at family gatherings. She would have appreciated that, I replied, genuinely touched by her reflection. The autumn sun warmed our faces as we sat in companionable silence, two sisters finding connection not through prescribed family roles, but through shared commitment to something more enduring than the inheritance that had catalyzed our journey. When people show you who they truly are, through their actions, their priorities, their responses to challenge, believe them. Family narratives can be powerful and persistent, but they cannot withstand the light of documented truth. The most valuable inheritance isn't measured in financial assets, but in the legacy of integrity that guides your choices when those assets are threatened. I had lost the family I thought I had, but found something more valuable: clarity, purpose, and relationships based on truth rather than expectation. Sometimes the path to genuine connection requires disrupting comfortable patterns that served everyone except yourself. What would you do if those closest to you revealed they valued appearance over integrity? Would you accept their judgment? Or would you stand firmly in your own truth, whatever the cost? The answer shapes not just your inheritance, but your legacy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.